Hi everyone, Victor Nuno of Fantasy Hockey Life here. Just wanted to talk a little bit about our really cool Fantasy Hockey Life player cards. If you haven't had the privilege of being able to check them out, I highly recommend you do. They're part of our Patreon package. So if you're an ultra lifer, you get access to a whole bunch of cool things, the ranks, lists, forward, goalie D. But I think one of the best features is the player cards, and that's what I wanted to show you. And we've had some updates recently, so I wanted to kind of go over some of the details with all of them. So I'm going to share the screen here and hopefully be able to explain a little bit about what is in these cards and make them a little bit more useful for you. Okay, so here we go. Should be able to see the card there. And I'm just going to go through a couple of players that I'm thinking about. And right now it's up on Ryan Leonard. So Leonard, the part of the reason people are really excited about Leonard is the fact that he has a strong peripheral floor. And that is certainly true. Sometimes you hear this about people, oh, they're physical, or they're big. And that may or may not mean that they actually hit or block a lot. So it's nice to see that. And that's something that this card shows. So you see the name, the team. This is the league that it's playing in. So this is based on what's actually happened. It's not a projection. The only projection comes in the middle, which I'll explain that in a little bit. It gives you where they were drafted. And then all of this is on a per 60 basis. You see these six things here: goals, assists, penalty minutes, shots, hits, blocks. This is all per 60. The average just averages all of them. And then the points is just obviously the points, the goals and assists, and the bash is just these three categories, the block, shots, and hits. So pretty much all of it is based on the per 60. And that's really important because some guys might have limited action in the KHL or they might have a diminished role on their CHL team, and you want to know what they can do with maximum minutes. If they're playing top of the lineup NHL, that's going to be a big difference than if they're maxing out already in junior. So there might not be much improvement. So Leonard goals and assists in the NCAA per 60 compared to all other NCAA players, 100 percentile, 10 out of 10. You can see that this 10 for the assist is slightly lower than that 10. So that's just a rounding issue probably. So he was probably like 9.6 or something, but it rounds up to a 10. So you could see already that goals are slightly more. These are some standard deviation numbers, which you can see. So well above for goals, less for assists. And you can see the percentile there. We in our tier dynasty league that we run at Fantasy Hockey Life, we view PIMS penalty minutes as a bad thing, in particular minor penalties. So this being super negative means that he has a lot of penalty minutes, minor penalties in particular. So if PIMs are good in your league, you can just think about this oppositely, and it's a good thing for you. In a league like the Tidy, that might be a bit of an issue. That's going to give you negative points. Then you can see that the shots and the hits are both 100th percentile and a little bit more for the shots versus the hits. And the blocks are pretty great as well. And an interesting note here is that 60th percentile for blocks, not just for a forward, but for all NCAA players. So he's blocking more than a lot of defensemen, which is great. So if you combine these three and you look over at the bash, he's a bash master. I mean, he's got one of the top bash floors of any prospect. And that's part of what makes him so exciting is that you have a super high floor for the bash. Clearly, the points are super high. And so 10 out of 10 for both of these is pretty awesome. But then there's a bit of a projection that comes into it. And that's what this number is here. So we call this the puck stud rating. And the puck stud rating is how great are they going to be on your fantasy team when they reach their full potential. So out of 10, 10 being the 10 out of 10 are your Connor McDavid's, Leon Draisaitl, Connor Bedard, Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, these guys that never leave your lineup. They're staples in your lineup no matter what, pretty much regardless of format. They're the top of the top. And a five would be, average, so kind of like replacement level, who you're looking at potentially to stream in. And then in between, you sort of have above average would be, okay, these are guys that are probably on my roster, but they're not super exciting. So a 6 would be they're kind of exciting, but not like amazing. And then you have your 7 and your 8. So that's the first number. So 7 is what I have assigned to Leonard, meaning I think he's a 70th percentile guy, which is pretty good. That means he's well above average. And then the next number is what percent chance does he have to reach that potential? So if he has a 55% chance of hitting a 7, then that means he has a pretty good chance of being a strong contributor to your lineup. So the percent and the rating can be very different depending on the volatility of the prospect. Someone could have a huge upside, but may not have a very likely ability to reach that upside. So that's something that's baked into the projection. And I think that's really important because just having a rating isn't as helpful as, you know, knowing how likely someone is to hit that huge upside. We can look at a couple more examples here just to see. So I'm going to put in Demidov. And one thing you can see here is that there are multiple options. So you could look at his MHL, his VHL, or his KHL time, and that'll give you some slightly different information. So we can see that the KHL time, there isn't a whole lot of data other than he didn't really take penalties. He got a fair number of blocks, and that's about it. Okay, well, that's not very helpful. We need to make sure that we look at something a little bit more useful. So let's look at his MHL data, which is going to look very different because he did a lot more things. He scored a lot. And so it's important to know the context of what league you're in. You can see that the PIMs are the minor penalties are much different here, which makes sense. He was in a different league and he was able to play a lot more. So that may have translated into a different style. You can see that the goals and assists are great. The shots are great. The hits are average and blocks are well below average. But based on the shots and hits alone, he should have pretty good bash. But you can see how this 10 is very different from Ryan Leonard's 10. Not really the same. You can see the league that this is based on, the raw stats, and you can see where he was drafted. So this is the puck stud rating. And one of the things that's cool is that Brandon, our great guru who designed all this, the puck stud and the bash is looking, this color, this dark color correlates to the shot. So you can see that the bash in this outer circle tells you what contribution each is giving to that bash. So it's mostly shots, almost entirely, a little bit of hits, and then a tiny amount of blocks. So his bash is almost entirely shots. So that's good to know that, you know, he's a volume shooter and a lot of his peripheral value will be shots and not anything else. So it's just good to know that. And then you see the puck stud rating, 8.90. That means 8 is his projection. He should be an 80th percentile, and he has a 90% chance of hitting that. So that is interesting to know because there's a choice here that basically has to be made. And that choice is this player an 8 or a 9? Because I personally think he's in that range. But what is the percent of him reaching that? So you kind of have to decide, is he super duper likely of being an 8 or a little less likely of being a 9? And I think you can read these stats that way. And I think it's helpful to read it that way. He's either super likely to be an 8, or I could have made this a 9.10, 9.10. So 10% chance of being a 9. To me, those are kind of similar. He's either really unlikely, but has a chance to be a 9 out of 10, or he's super likely to be an 8. And those are kind of similar. And I think it's helpful to to be able to understand that and to know that that's kind of what it means. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, he's an 8.90, but this other guy is a 9.05, so he's better." Well, not necessarily, because a 9.05 means just a 5% chance of being um of being a 9. So that's not that great, right? So yeah, when you see those things and you see that variety, just kind of know that they're really pretty similar. All right. So let's look at some other examples here. So right now, the main one when you come up is Macklin Celebrini. So you can see Celebrini and what he looks like. So great for shots, decent for hits, doesn't block a whole lot, but scoring is great. So his floor, again, mostly shots, but hits more than you might think. And the puck stud rating 9.60. So 60% chance of hitting a nine, which is great. That's a lot more than Demidov. I think he's just a more for sure chance of hitting his full potential, which I think is really important to think about. Um, and yeah, so that's one. There's some other ones that we can look at as examples. Sometimes the amount of peripheral surprise you. Um, I was going to mention Gautier, so Cutter Gautier, and you can also, so you can see here, you can look at World Junior Championship data. Now, this is a small sample size, 7 games, so sometimes this looks a little wonky, and you have to just bear with that. So he had some pretty great scoring, some great shots, but that looks a little bit different than if we look at his Boston College data. And the big difference is the hits are way better. The goals are way better. The PIMs are a little bit different. So all of these, I personally would refer to the NCAA data. It's more reliable, or the season-long data, if for whatever league they're in. But I think that looking at it this way is good. Having the access to the World Junior data is good though, because maybe someone did something a little interesting or different. Maybe they played different level of competition. So all that's interesting to have. But this is maybe a more accurate representation of what he will be like. So 7.58, 58% chance of being a seven. Maybe a little lower than some people have him, but just that's my opinion. But then this is what he's actually done in college. So hits a ton. And that's one of the things that's really different between him, and we'll look at Michkov next. But in terms of this year, you can expect Gautier to shoot a ton. He had an 11 shot game in preseason. So yeah, he loves to shoot. He hits a lot though, and his blocks aren't that much lower than average. So his peripheral floor is super high. And then if we look at Michkov, who different league, KHL, but you see that the perfs here are almost non-existent. And even this delta for the shots was a little bit lower than Gautier, but that's a little bit harder to tell. So his bash still looks pretty good, but it's just all shots. Actually, his blocks are a little bit better, but it's basically just the shots. And I have his projection at 8.42. So he's less likely to hit the 8, in my opinion, but he has a higher upside. And then you can kind of quibble with like, okay, what happens when you give above 40%, 50%? How much more likely is that? Well, that's just an opinion, but thinking about that and kind of pushing them over that threshold or below the threshold is something I think a lot about. And a lot of things go into that. And Michkov certainly has play away from the puck that is a little bit, not ideal. We'll look at a couple more examples. Caden Lindstrom, a lot of people were talking about him as having good peripheral floor, and you can see here why. Shots, hits, 10 out of 10, 100 percentile. Blocks, maybe not as good, but he had the puck a lot. I think if he plays for Columbus, he won't have the puck quite as much, and maybe those blocks will come up a little bit more. The PIMS being so low is because he takes a lot of penalty minutes. So if you're in a PIMS league, you got penalties, minutes, you got hits, you got shots, and I think that the blocks will be at least average, if not better. Plus, there's face-off wins if he actually bends business center. That isn't something we've included. We've talked about maybe including it in a different metric, but as of now, that is not in there. So show you a couple other ones. So Gabe Perreault is another like Leonard. They have been great together, but you can see a big difference in Perreault with the hits. Doesn't really hit and doesn't really shoot that much. But what is interesting about Perreault is he actually blocks a ton. He blocked a lot of shots. So people talk about his play off from the puck. I have criticized that at times, but he's at least engaged enough to get in front of pucks. So that's good. Good to see that. 45% chance of being a seven. So he's someone who, has big upside, but there's a little bit more volatility in that projection. So these are all interesting things to think about. So wanted to really focus on the projection, the puck stud rating from 0 to 10. Basically, if someone is a 5, then you should not be that excited about them. 6 and up, you should get a little bit more excited, and then it really depends on the percentage, how likely all that is. So I think that's important to note. And really thinking about the PIMs as we rate them negative. If you like PIMs, then you can flip that. And then really pointing out that these are rate stats, so per 60. And then it really depends on how many minutes they're going to get. If they're going to be a 16, 17 minute a night forward, their rate stats aren't going to translate as well. If they can play 22 plus minutes a night, well, then that's obviously going to massively help their ability to have a huge peripheral floor. So hopefully that was useful. Wanted to really mention all of that, and hopefully you find it useful. And if you want to support the show and get access to them, you can do it just month to month, or you can pay for a whole year. But these are updated regularly. They'll be updated throughout the season. Every time there's a big tournament or any big change, we'll update the puck stud ratings. I try not to change things too quickly just based on a few games or a hot start. I want to see a larger body of work to make sure that it's sustainable, but we certainly do update them when there's a change about a certain player, and we're certainly responsive to feedback. If you have a suggestion for things that you'd like to see, we've incorporated a lot of things. In fact, I think the percent volatility factor is something that was suggested by someone. So we're happy to do that. You can also have access to the ranks and the lists for the forwards, goalies, defense. You can also look at team by team prospect breakdowns, which is really helpful. So all that stuff's available. I want to make sure you're aware of that, and looking forward to another great season. So thanks so much and take care. Happy hockey.